Everybody, I'm Cantonese Cat. Hey everybody, Cantonese Cat here. I don't know if you had a chance to look at the video that I did with Matt, the great Masby, back about a week or so ago. We're talking about different stocks, Palantir, GME, Mara, Ethereum, and Bitcoin. I just want to show you this clip here to kind of show you what the Gann Square was showing Matt and what he was thinking in terms of moving forward with Palantir price action.
Well, the cloud just gives us more resistance, the
Yeah,
the conversion line up
yeah,
there at around 2291.
yeah,
And so yeah, it's just basically trying to close. I think it did close above the baseline actually, so that's fine. But
yeah.
as you can see, it's still kind of far away from the top of the cloud. So it could just drift down this arc,
Mhm.
until it touches the cloud here in July and
Yeah.
then finally go up. So that's a possibility as well.
So if you look at the Gann square, the way that he was, really drawing a very, very nice arc right here that you're identifying. And he was also using different angles and trying to see what touches the most points. And this is still the beginning, like the first, how do you say that? Again, this is a video right here. I'm going to put up my Palantir chart here. He's fitting the price action using the first, square and using the curvature that you're seeing over here. And when I looked at it and I tried to fit my Gann square and I try to give a little bit more detail, and as far as I'm concerned, I just want the indicator to touch as many points as possible. I don't really honestly care what the indicator is. I mean, I would like to know the theory behind it. I want to know it's not just based on, absolute nonsense. But the thing about these kinds of price action is they are based on two things. One is based on human psychology, and the other one is could also be based on a lot of the algorithms from trading, right? So a lot of the price may, in terms of levels, things like that might be predetermined, and also human psychology kind of works very, very interestingly too. For some reason, certain numbers and through time may actually reflect on these kinds of indicators. I don't exactly know how it works, but all I'm going to say is I did my own Gann square, and I try to see, whether or not we end up ranging sideways for quite some time before, further breakout up or down. And I came up with this Gann square over here. What I'm seeing is, for the most part, it seems to touch enough angles and seems to touch enough arcs here for me to feel, somewhat confident about it. Although I like to see it, potentially touch a little bit more points down here at this arc. But for the most part, I think it's showing you a pretty clear picture of this big giant volume breakout about this arc. Maybe that's probably a reason why I just never really looked back. But the story is pretty clear. It break about one arc, and it tries to break into the other one. Got rejected initially and got broke back inside. Found support here at the angle over here. Got rejected from the top of this horizontal line, and this horizontal line around 2021, which I draw around 20 and a half, is a pretty important level that dated back all the way to like 2020, 2021. And there's also a pretty big volume shelf over here. So if you look over here, yeah, it's as expected, it's going to serve as resistance, right? And it went through big giant volume push to push above this horizontal level. And since then, it's just been hitting this arc and just been falling down the arc here on declining volume. It had a little bit of a breakout trying to break through this angle over here, got rejected, and it followed kind of back into the arc down here. Now, I do think that the 20 trillion level is going to be very, very strong support. If it doesn't end up holding, and I still anticipate it to hold, but if it doesn't end up holding, then most likely it's going to end up falling to maybe like the 18 range or something like that, on the top of the Ichimoku cloud over here. And it's also going to probably touch the arc, the bottom of the arc over here, right before potentially bouncing and maybe even backtest the arc and backtest the top of the cloud before going up further, right? And that process could indeed take a couple months, kind of like what the Great Matsby was saying. There's also another scenario that could also happen is that it doesn't always have to touch the top of the cloud, right? Like over here, it didn't really touch the top of the cloud. Over here, it didn't really backtest the top of the cloud at all. And it just kind of go through these, increasing, breaking through these arcs, breaking through these horizontal lines, breaking through these, angles, things like that. So it doesn't always have to backtest the cloud. There's a scenario where I think it's possible that it could break out above the arc you're still gonna have some resistance up here with the conversion line and the baseline or the Tenkan and the kitchen. And you may have a hard time breaking above these lines immediately and end up back testing the 2021 level on the top of the arc before going ballistic. And then it can go ballistic within a matter of maybe several months or so, because we've been really ranging sideways here on declining volume for a very long time, and you know that the company's numbers actually not bad. I think they're just selling off because they're selling off. I mean, a lot of times it doesn't always have to make sense in terms of what the Wall Street's thinking process is, but we have been stuck in a range, and the earnings and the buying power is just wasn't enough to kind of push us through these resistance above. And sure enough, if it doesn't go through resistance, we're still stuck in the range. As far as I'm concerned, I think we might be stuck between this angle up here and this horizontal line right here around 20. The cloud down here hasn't really broken down yet, so I'm going to give it a benefit of a doubt that support's going to hold. And right now, as far as I'm concerned, we might just be closer to the bottom of the range. There's still a couple of resistance right above, but as far as I'm concerned, I think we're still at the bottom of this range over here. Is it going to break down to touch the cloud and touch the bottom of the arc? It's always a possibility. Do I think it's likely based on what I'm seeing in terms of volume? You know, big giant volume breakout above the zone right here around 2021, back testing it on declining volume. Do I think that it's going to necessarily break down? Not necessarily. Could it do so? Yeah. And like what the great Matsby was saying, if price drops down to this range, or maybe even lower, like there's always a possibility, right? If price drops down to that range, probably going to be a pretty darn good buying opportunity. that's to and it would still be a higher low compared to what over here, right? Like you really not going to get a lower low unless the price drop down below 15.66. And there's a lot of support underneath before it gets there. So that's one scenario, but I favor the scenario where it breaks above the cloud, got rejected by, for example, like conversion line of the Tenkan up here around 23, maybe like 25 is also going to be potential, resistance range based on this horizontal zone right here. And we got rejected somewhere around there, back test the top of the arc, and then just choose one of these paths going up. I think that's what I favor in terms of what I think maybe a potential scenario. Just because I find this, support zone here to be quite important. Because if you do the volume shelf over here, I do think that around like 20 or so, you're gonna have some pretty good, decent support over here. You could potentially wick down and test the top of this volume shelf. But price has just been spending a long time. Like if you don't go all the way back from the history of the stock, and if you just say, hey, just look at a volume shelf down here, there's been a lot of volumes around this level over here. It's just basically been stuck in a range. So I'm not expecting to go all the way down, but if it goes down, you're gonna have a lot of really good support down underneath, right? You're gonna have like 20 is gonna be a pretty decent support over here, and it drops down to like 18 and a half, all the way down to 18. You're gonna have some really, really strong support down here. So again, if it goes down there, I think it's gonna be a good buying opportunity. A couple other things. I'm just going to change the time frame here to kind of show you. But before I do that, I'm going to show turn off the cloud here. I'm going to show you the bull market support band. Right now, price is below the bull market support band. So again, that's another range that is getting stuck in, right? Pretty strong support here around 2021. And you have the, positive sloping bull market support band that you might end up ranging kind of like over here. We have support underneath right here, and resistance up above. It might take some time for it to kind of work out, maybe another few weeks or so before you're really able to kind of pick a direction either down or going up, which I favor up. Most likely they might end up trying to test back up here around like 22, 23, maybe even higher 25 before back testing this area before going up. I'm not necessarily expecting a back test though. That's the thing. Like all I'm gonna say is I'm just gonna play it cool. I'm gonna keep buying, some every week around this range over here. I'm not gonna necessarily try to time it. You can trade these moves if you want to, but there's always a possibility that none of these things I'm saying would work out, at all. because if Nvidia had good earnings, which it did, it ended up pulling the entire market up, and it ends up just really igniting the AI narrative again, and Palantir end up just going break above the arc and just doesn't look back on high volume. I also don't want to miss that move, right? If it goes back down here, I'm still gonna have some cash. I'm gonna try to buy as much as possible, but I'm not gonna be too cute about it, right? So anyway, that's the Pokemon support band. I think we might potentially range for another few weeks or so before picking our direction, either down to test the cloud here on the weekly, or you could potentially just keep on going up. Now, another thing to kind of look at too is a different time frame. Look at the 2 week time frame. And I'm going to put the Ichimoku cloud over here. You can see that again, we're stuck in the range. The conversion line's around like 22, right? Which is where the my support band is also around. So you may be stuck in range around like 20 to 22 for a little bit while, for a few weeks before kind of picking a direction. That's certainly entirely possible. If you look at the monthly though, anyway, at the 2 week at the 2 week chart, the cloud looks exactly very similar. Like instead of like 18, maybe like 17 and a half, somewhere around there for the top of the cloud, and it could also be a confluent area with the bottom of the arc right there, right? If you look at a monthly, the monthly doesn't show you that much resistance above in terms of Ichimoku cloud. If anything, the conversion line of the 10 can actually serve as pretty decent support, right? Confluent with this horizontal zone over here. So that tells me that it tends to support once, twice. I think over the next few weeks it might be ready to bounce, but obviously it can still go through some consolidating phases and doing a little bit more back test, trying to find some solid footing before going up, right? But the blue line over here is like 20.59, which is right at where I drew the horizontal line right here. So this area, I still think that it could potentially serve as pretty decent support. Obviously, it can keep going down with the arc and go down lower to the Kijun or the baseline over here. But I don't know whether or not it's going to happen. Very, very nice bull flag that's happening, and the volume really hasn't been that impressive in terms of selling. So despite what the short-term sentiment is, despite people might lose patience and may want to jump from like Palantir to Bitcoin or other things that might be a little bit hotter, I still think this is a really good looking chart. I'm not going to try to be cute about it. This is still my largest stock position. I don't really plan on changing it anytime soon. So hopefully when price goes up, it just solidifies my number one individual stock position. I just don't even have to look back at all. A couple of things. Do I expect a big move to come soon, or any big potential move to come anytime soon for that matter? The one way to look at it would be you can look at the Bollinger Band, you can look at different time frame. Right now, yeah, the daily is not really too squeezy. I mean, it got a little bit squeezy here, and we have a big move up. Got rejected from the angle over here. But yeah, that was the big move from the squeeze. Right now, we don't really have like too much squeezy. Before the last big move, you can see that it was really, really significantly squeezing, right? Yeah. So, and then the move before that, it was really significantly squeezing, right, before these big moves. So right now, we just don't really have that energy building up. So I can see it potentially ranging in for a little bit longer, maybe for another few weeks or so before doing that. The 2-day does look a little bit more squeezier. The 2-day does look a little bit more squeezier. And again, when you have these kind of squeezing kind of thing, it could potentially mean a bigger movement is coming, but it can also take maybe at least a few weeks for it to kind of brew, right? Weekly, it's not really that squeezy at all, and you can see the 20-week moving average, which is basically below our support band right now, is even though it's upsloping, it might be serving as a little bit of resistance up here. So we'll see how that goes. On the 2-week chart, not really that squeezy. Monthly chart for Palantir in terms of what the Bollinger Band is doing, you can kind of see like the Bollinger Band is still expanding on the upwards zone, so it's going to allow price to potentially hit some of these higher targets, right? Although the low Bollinger Band is not yet quite expanded. If anything, it's started to contract here a little bit because the price consolidating for about 3 or 4 months now, right? So I think once you're able to get one of these big moves up here, and I do think that they're gonna potentially happen, the Bollinger Band, the lower Bollinger Band could potentially go all the way down to the floor if we end up having a breakout. Currently, the top of the Bollinger Band here on the monthly is 26.35. I do think the top Bollinger Band, because this is a very, very nice bull market, I do think the top Bollinger Band, as it continues to expand, is going to serve as a magnet for price to go up a lot higher. So I think the next month is probably also going to end up keeping expanding here up a little bit, allowing price to potentially push up higher whenever it decides to break out, whenever that would be. So going back to the weekly chart here, I'm gonna just turn off the Bollinger Band over here, and I'm just gonna show you in terms of any potential targets that we might end up hitting. I'm also gonna try to post this chart here on X here in a little bit too. So a couple of things here right off the bat, I think it could hit if it breaks out about this range over here. I mean, obviously it can go down to like 18, 17, lower, right? There's always a possibility. I don't think it's probably going to go that much lower than that if it's not going that at all, right? But if it ends up going to the upper areas, I think 35, 30, 33, 35 could be a good range at this arc right here underneath the angle for it to go to. You can potentially hit the horizontal line over here, which is going to be around like 38 to 40. Right? You can hit the arc right here, which is going to be around like 40s, high 40s, maybe like low 50s, somewhere around there, right? And ultimately, I think that a reasonable price target within the next 3 years or so could be up here around $70. I'm also going to show you as to why I think that is. One reason is I always like to kind of line things with the Fibonacci levels. I'm just going to do a rough Fibonacci level here from its previous all-time around $45 down to the all-time low down here, right? So I'm also going to change this. Instead of doing like a logarithm thing, I'm just going to do it on a regular scale. And what you can see is you do see a little bit of confluence over here, around the mid 30s. You have a pretty important, Fibonacci level, and up around the arc right here, around like 40, like high 40s, you might have the previous all-time high over here. But the 1.618 level, which generally it can be a pretty decent price target for anything that's really growing, any kind of growing assets. If it breaks above all-time high, I think the next logical target is going to be 1.618, which is around $70. So I can potentially see this hitting it maybe over the next couple of years, 3 to 5 years, maybe less than that. So I can potentially see it hitting that level over here, and then it can also potentially hit some of the higher levels here as well, right? But those are kind of my thoughts. This is obviously forming higher highs and higher lows. So it really just depends on, in terms of the consolidation, how long it's going to take. It's going to take just as long as it did over here, which means that we might go sideways for another couple of months before breaking out. Or is it just going to, break above this arc, back test it? Or is it going to go down lower, back test the, weekly Ichimoku cloud, before going up higher? Either way, like, it doesn't really matter to me. The exact path it takes doesn't really matter to me. I still think that the likelihood, because this is a very nice bull trend, the most likely scenario is that it's going to keep going up. Even if it finds resistance here at a 45-degree angle, most likely it's still going to get going up. Anyway, those are my thoughts on Palantir. I hope you enjoyed this video. Have a good one. Bye.